Class updates. Here we go. We're going to start with, can you guys guess? Barb Nation. So we're going to start with the Barbarian. We're getting a new ability, Mighty Throw. So you're going to hurl your weapon, it's going to hit the ground, and then when it's on the ground, it's going to pulse, and it's going to deal damage for 4 seconds. So it just pulses out and it hits the ground. So in terms of your enhancement, well thrown, while the weapon is out, you gain 25% increased attack speed. So while the weapon's in the ground, you gain 25% increased attack speed. That's pretty big. Then Fighter's Mighty Throw. So this is going to be one of the branches at the top. Swapping weapons near any of your thrown weapons creates an additional pulse. Each extra pulse generates 3% of your maximum life as a barrier for 6 seconds. I think that they are going to go a lot into barrier into this expansion pack. So that's going to give you barrier. Mighty Throw's impact deals 200% increased damage and stuns enemies for 2 seconds. So those are a couple of the changes for Barbarians. This is what it looks like. So remember, this is not final. This is just going, this could change completely. The animation might change, but when it hits the ground, it pulses out there. So now if you're going to gain 25% increased attack speed while it's on the ground. And then depending on what option you choose, it's either going to stun, which you can boost damage into stun, or it's going to give you barrier. I'm assuming barrier is going to come in pretty big for this here. So now we have new items here. For the Barbarian, we're getting a unique helm. So what it's going to do, it's called Ugly Bastard's Helm. You're going to get 35% all resist on it, which is nice. Wrath of the Berserker cooldown reduction. So this isn't even with greater affixes, right? Lucky hit chance to deal fire damage. It's going to be interesting. Prolific Fury for your Barbarian. So the Prolific Fury is going to be generation. Let me pull this up here. So if we go into the build planner here, and you go to your skill tree, so Prolific Fury is right here. You get 7 ranks into Prolific Fury just from that one thing. So that could save us skill points if we don't need it. The most important part, the aspect, casting Wrath of the Berserker causes you to explode, dealing damage, and while berserking, all damage that you deal is converted to fire damage. You deal 60% increased fire damage. This is going to be interesting because they're making elemental barbarians. This is new. I'm kind of interested in what this is going to be. So for aspect of Flaming Rampage, charge gains an additional charge. Each target hit by it explode for fire damage to all of the enemies around. Steel Grasp and Iron Maelstrom launch up to 10 metal shards and deal physical damage. So every time that you cast Steel Grasp, it's actually going to shoot off shards and do some physical damage too. So new Barbarian passives that we're getting here. Barbed Carapace. For every 5 Fury, for every 25 Fury you spend, you gain 10% Thorns. I think that they're going to try and push Thorns. When you looked at the Spiritborns, I think with the Spiritborns and with the Barbarians now, Thorns is going to be an actual thing that is going to be very, very viable. Casting a skill with a cooldown grants you Unhindered for 5 seconds. During this time, you deal 100% of your Thorns damage as physical damage to close enemies nearby. So that means you're going to be able to deal damage with Thorns, not just wait for them to hit you, which is new. So that's going to be pretty cool here. The new legendary node that we're getting is going to be Force of Nature. Your Earthquakes have a 75% chance to spawn Dust Devils, which is kind of cool. So it spawns Dust Devils every second. They deal damage. Earthquake damage is increased by 30% of your damage versus close bonus, up to a maximum of 150%. That 150% is going to be multiplicative. I guarantee you. It doesn't say it right now. It doesn't say additive or multiplicative, but it's definitely going to be. Heavy Hitter. Your ultimate skills deal 15% more damage. Irresponsible. Casting Weapon Mastery skill fortifies you for 10% of your maximum life. That's interesting. I wonder with the changes to your core skills using that new unique, if that's going to affect that. That's actually a really nice way to get your fortify up instead of having to put skill points, or even take some of the legendary nodes in the Paragon board now that you're only going to have limited boards. Belligerent, damaging an enemy with a basic skill increases your damage by 3%. Interesting. I wonder if, I don't think that stacks. That's interesting that it's such a low number. Damaging an enemy with a basic skill increases your damage by 3%. It might be a multiplicative, so that might not be bad, but this would make sense if it's stacked a couple times, 2 or 3 times. But okay, we'll have to see what happens, because this is not final. So we'll see what happens when it comes out. And what I didn't cover here, for unhindered, character can move through enemies and their movement speed cannot be reduced. So it's basically like running the Ghostwalker aspect, where you can move through monsters and not get stopped. So you have this right here. Now we're going to get into the Druid updates here. So the Druid's new ability is Stone Burst. Gathering stones beneath your enemies, then it detonates, dealing damage. Channeling this ability increases its size up to 400% increase after 0.9 seconds. It deals more damage and size the more you channel it. And then the increases that you're going to get here for it, it's going to be Stone Burst, Final Explosion damage is increased by 25% within the initial radius. So that's the very first radius right here. Primal Stone Burst, when channeling Stone Burst, and for 2 seconds after it ends, you gain 30% increased attack speed. So that means that at the very end of your channel, right, because it says right here, you can be channeled, and it's going to deal damage and increase the radius, you'll gain that attack speed for 2 seconds after. Raging Stone Burst, this is your other option. Stone Burst costs 66% more spirit, and its final explosion deals 50% more damage. So this is what the Druid ability is going to look like here. So as you see right here, he's channeling it and it's getting bigger. So, but now you can also cast it as you go. You don't have to channel it. You can cast it, or you can channel it and it'll get bigger, just like that's doing right there. But you don't have to do that. The more you channel it, the more damage it does, and the more size that it gets increased. So this is going to be the new Druid ability. We'll see where it kind of fits in, because it's going to increase your attack speed, do more damage. Channeling is always a little rough, but we'll see. So the new Druid items that we got here, we got the Stone of Vehement. This is going to be a unique totem, so it's going to be your offhand. This inherently is going to give you damage to crowd control enemies, which has been a multiplier for Druids. So it's going to should play into one of the legendary nodes for a multiplier. Willpower, which is great. Critical strike damage. If you guys look at the damage here, look at the damage for a second. This is a level 800 item. This is where the stat crunch comes in. Level 800 item power normally has thousands of damage, but because they crunched all the stats, this is what the new attack and the new damage is going to look like. We're going to feel exactly like we do now. It's still going to feel the same, even though that damage is lowered, but this is what it's going to look like here. 30% chance that your Stone Burst to cast twice. So what we were just watching here, so this right here, you're going to get a 30% chance for this to cast twice now instead of just one. And then while channeling Stone Burst, and for 2 seconds after, you gain 15% damage reduction. Stone Burst Final Explosion deals 15% increased damage, further increased by 15% for each size increase. So every 0.9 seconds that you channel, it increases its size. You're going to get 15% of that final burst damage. So if you look right here, that's actually going, they're trying to make this really, really big here. Aspect of Anticline Burst. Stone Burst deals 35% increased damage when cast at or above 100 spirit. It immediately is at maximum size. Now you get the full benefit from having this aspect here with this aspect here. Aspect of Shattered Defense. Stone Burst causes your enemies to take 15% increased damage from your other skills for 5 seconds. Stone Burst Spirit cost is reduced by 10. So this is actually going to be pretty big. And this is, if you see this though, you see the rank. Now we're going to go to rank 21 for all of your aspects. Aspect of Rabid Bear. While Grizzly Rage is active, skills that critically strike apply rabies. Your poison damage is increased by 90%. These are probably multiplicative numbers. It doesn't tell us right now, but probably. Storm Crow's aspect. Ravens now deal lightning damage, which is increased by 50%. Ravens active deal its full damage in half the time. and the enemies inside are stunned. That's a great form of CC, a lot of damage. Aspect of the Agile Wolf. Shred gains a 4th attack that hits all enemies surrounding and deals 60% increased damage, knocking the enemies down. That actually is kind of cool. So now it's going to add some AoE damage to Shred. So you have your Druid's new passives. So we'll start with one with Nature. Your companion skills each gain 1 additional companion and deal 50% increased damage. That's probably a multiplicative. You gain the effect. This actually tells you now where it is, which is kind of cool. Your companions are your ravens, wolves, and your poison creepers. Untamed. Casting a companion skill grants +4 ranks to your companion skills for 5 seconds. Thank you for the follow. Feral Aptitude. You deal 3% increased damage while healthy. Healthy is above 80%. Thank you, Havoc, for the follow also. And you deal 3% increased damage well above 100% movement speed. You're always at 100% movement speed, so you're always going to gain that 3%, unless you're slowed, which that shouldn't last for very long. So you're always going to have, looks like 6% increase, and this is going to be multiplicative, I'm sure. These bonuses can stack. Catastrophe. You deal 5% increased damage for 8 seconds after casting the ultimate skills. What I'm thinking, because I'm used to seeing big multiplicative numbers, but I forgot we're doing a stat crunch. So these 3% that we're seeing all over the place are actually probably pretty big. With the new damage system that they're going to be running out, these are probably going to be big increases to damage here. Humanity, you deal 5% increased damage while in human form. You can actually use your cosmetics as a druid if you're running in human form. Backlash, you deal 4% increased damage for 5 seconds after casting a defensive skill. All right, that's a druid. Let's check out the necromancer. Here it is. Thank you for the follow, Lens. So the necromancer got a brand new skill. We got Soul Rift. For 8 seconds, you corrupt surrounding enemies, dealing damage per second. Every 0.25 seconds of the duration, you absorb the souls of up to 3 enemies, gaining 2 essence and barrier of 2% of your maximum life for 5 seconds. You absorb 3 souls at a time from bosses. This is actually cool because it works on bosses just the same way that it's going to work on enemies. When you go into the enhancement here, every soul absorbed increases your damage by 1% up to 30%. This bonus persists for 5 seconds after your soul rift ends. And then enemies within the soul absorbed become vulnerable for 2 seconds. When damaging an enemy affected by soul rift, you have a 5% chance to absorb their souls. The reason that there's only one option for this is because this is a new ultimate for the necromancer. So this is what it looks like here. So move this center so you guys can see it. So the monsters run in. All of these little blue things that are getting sucked in is the souls, and it's going to be adding barrier, and it's going to slow them, and it's going to do damage to them. So it's actually pretty cool to see. It's actually a very cool animation. Like, look at this thing. It's like it's going very slow. So if you cast your ultimate and you're in a bind, it's going to slow everything. You're going to deal damage to it. You're going to put a barrier on you. And look, like they barely can get to him before they've attacked. So that's the Necromancer Ultimate, the new one that they're going to be getting. So now the Necromancer items. We're going to be starting with the Unmaker. This is going to be 800 item power, 17.5% damage reduction while you have a barrier. Ultimate gives you a barrier. Now you're going to get more damage reduction while you have a barrier. Thank you for the follow, Stephen. 20% increased resource generation, +4 to Soul Rift. Now remember, if you look here, Soul Rift. Ultimates can now have points put into them. 4 points put into this automatically by wearing that helmet. So you're going to get more cooldown, more damage. So you might be able to get this up high enough to almost spam it. Up to 3 to imperfectly balance with Necromancer only. So your Soul Rift's duration is increased by 0.5 seconds for every 30 essence you spend while it is active, up to 8 seconds. Soul Rift deals 200% of its shadow damage per second to the surrounding enemies for every 30 essence you gain while it's active. So this has got some pretty cool interactions that it's going to have. So necromancers are probably going to be running around just like stealing people's souls, which is very necromancer-ish and kind of fun to do. So one of your new aspects you're going to be getting is Reaping Lotus Aspect. Sever no longer returns, and instead it splits into 3 specters, and that expands out and back from its apex. Sever deals up to 120% of its normal damage. Okay, yeah, so here's Phasing Poltergeist. This is actually very, very cool. And this reminds me of the Howl from Below. When Bone Spirit explodes, it spawns 3 spirits that seek nearby enemies, then deal up to 40% of its damage. This effect can only occur once per cast. So let's go over this last aspect and I'll show you what that looks like. Your golem active also causes your golem to erupt. When you click the golem button, it causes your golem to erupt. Physical damage to surrounding enemies. Your golem consumes corpses to reduce its remaining cooldown by 1 second. A couple more things, and then I'll show you guys what the new ability looks like here. It's actually pretty cool to see. So Affliction. Enemies affected by vulnerable, crowd control, or shadow damage over time are affected with Affliction and take 50% increased damage from you and your minions. Your curse skills deal damage. They deal shadow damage to enemies that have Affliction. This amount is increased by 30% of the damage to crowd control, vulnerable, and shadow damage over time combined. So this doesn't have a cap currently on it. I don't know how that's going to look. No cap normally goes pretty crazy, especially if this number here is going to be multiplicative. That means that you stack crowd control, vulnerable, and shadow damage over time, and you just shoot this number up. We'll see how that works when it actually drops. Frailty. Cursed enemies take 10% increased damage from you and your minions. This bonus is increased by 10% each second they are cursed for up to 40%. So you can do 40% increased damage the longer that they're cursed. Finality. You deal 5% increased damage for 8 seconds after casting an ultimate skill. So now you cast your ultimate skill, which has an increased cooldown because you have so many ranks to it. You're going to deal 5% more, and maybe you can spam it. Necrotic Fortitude. On a lucky hit chance, your damage has up to a 5% chance to grant barrier, which we need barrier, remember, for a necromancer, for 5% of your maximum life. Titan's Fall. Well fortified, you deal 6% increased damage to elites. Precision Decay. Your lucky hit chance is increased by 5%. Oh, this new aspect. Your Bone Spirit explodes and spawns 3. This is what it looks like right here. So you cast Bone Spirit, and it is going to hit and then explode out and hit all of the other enemies that it goes on to. So as soon as the initial explosion hits right here, 3 of them go out, and then it finds the other targets as it goes. It's basically like Howl from Below, that item there, but now you're getting it when you cast your Bone Spirit. So hopping into the Rogue is going to get Dance of Knives. This is really cool. Rogues are going to spin to win. A little bit different than a Barbarian, but we do have it. Channel to launch knives at surrounding enemies, consuming 1 charge per second. Each knife deals damage. You gain 20% movement speed and 10% dodge chance while channeling this. You get 6 charges total. So the charge cooldown is 1 second. So every 6 seconds, you can use this for 6 seconds, is basically how that's going to work. Your enhancements that you're going to get, every 30 meters that you travel, channeling this ability, you grants 4 charges. If you can move fast enough, and you can move 30 meters inside of that 6 seconds, you're automatically going to gain 4 charges. So that means that you're going to have 10 charges within that time. Methodical Dance of Knives. When you stop channeling Dance of Knives, drop up to 12 stun grenades, each dealing damage. The channeling duration determines how many are dropped. So the longer you can get that to channel by using Enhanced Dance of Knives, you're going to drop more stun grenades. The other option is Disciplined Dance of Knives. Each Dance of Knives slows enemies by 25% for 3 seconds and has a 20% chance to pierce. What a pierce does is that it moves straight through an enemy and then it can hit another enemy. So you have a chance to shoot it through something and then hit something else. So here is what this looks like here. So the rogues spin to win right here. As you can see at the very end there, he dropped the stun grenades. That's from how long it gets channeled for. When they're close, if you see, the blades actually target. So the rogue throws them at the monster that it's hitting. So instead of it, but when they're not near anything, you'll see them when like it goes off to the side when he's not near anything at all. This is pretty cool to see. So we're going to see how that scales up. Rogue passives. Alchemist Admixture. Dealing 3 different types of non-physical damage increases the potency of your imbuement skills by 40% for 5 seconds. This potency further increases by 20% of the total amount of bonus damage to your poison, shadow, and cold damage. So it goes, that current bonus, this looks like it's also uncapped. So if you deal poison, shadow, and cold all together, that means that you're going to get up to 40% increased damage here. This right here looks like you can further increase the damage bonus with uncapped. That's actually pretty cool. Dance Macabre. Casting a mobility skill or subterfuge skill increases the damage of your next skill by 50%. Target practice. Your critical strike chance with marksman or cutthroat skills is increased by 3%. These are your new passives for the rogues. Baelstra. Gain 4% increased damage for 4 seconds after evading. That's kind of cool. As soon as you evade, you get 4% increased damage from that. Evasion. After dodging an attack, you gain 2% damage reduction for 4 seconds. Unto Dawn. Your ultimate skills deal 15% increased damage. Onto the Sorcerer. This says Sorceress, so we're going to go with Sorceress. Sorceresses are gaining a new skill called Familiar. This has charges, 3 of them, and the charges have 12-second cooldown. Summon a familiar of the element of your last cast skill for 8 seconds. Familiar is actually going to be up for 8 seconds, even though there's a 12-second cooldown on the charge. The familiar chases enemies and periodically explodes, dealing damage. So the damage that it deals is the same element, and it's an area of effect. You have 6 familiars summoned at a time. So you can have up to 6 of them. So each time that you summon a non-familiar conjuration, you have a 25% chance to spawn a familiar of the same element. So that means that if you use something like Ice Blades, you have a 25% chance to spawn a familiar as well. So Enhanced Familiar. Familiar attacks gain an aura secondary effect based on their element. Fire Familiar applies burning damage. Cold Familiar applies chill damage, and Lightning Familiar stuns enemies for a second. Depending on how this works, this could replace your enchantments. So if you always need to run an enchantment for like fire, because we always need to run Fireball, right? Or Fireball as an enchantment as a Sorc. If you're running now a Fire Familiar, you now don't need that enchantment, and now you can use something else for that enchantment. So this could be kind of cool. So your 2 different abilities that you get when you branch off into this. Well, you have 2 or more different elements of familiar summoned, you gain 3% damage reduction. Familiar elements no longer tied to your previously cast skill. Instead, a familiar element progress in sequence. The sequence is fire to cold, cold to lightning, and lightning to fire. This way, you don't have to cast a lightning spell just to get a lightning familiar. You don't have to cast a fire just to get a fire familiar. You can cast any skill, and then they go in order. So you kind of know exactly what you're going to be getting. And then Invoked Familiar. While a familiar is active, you gain 10% increased damage to skills that deal that damage type. When your fire familiar is active, then you deal 10% increased fire damage. So what this looks like here, so this is going to be your familiars that are going to spawn as you cast. So that was your fire, and then there is your lightning one as well that stuns. So the enemy's stunned here. So that's your ice, and they do a little bit of damage too. So it's actually pretty cool. So you cast one spell, and then you get your ice. Then you cast another spell, you get your fire and your ice. Then you cast another spell, and then you get all 3 of them up at one time. For the Sorceress's new items. Sorceresses are going to be getting the Sidhi's Binding. You get 75% non-physical damage, 55% familiar explosion size, which means that whenever those familiars hit the ground and explode, they do 55% increased size. 27% chance for familiars to hit twice, which means that you're going to increase the damage that they're doing. It's going to have a bigger size. They're going to do AoE, so you're going to get bonuses for all of those familiars. Plus 4 to familiars for your Sorcs also. Casting a familiar now summons all 3 element variants at once. That is big, because now you don't have to worry about putting enchantments into your Sorc. You get all of the elements right there in one cast. Familiar duration is increased by 50%, and its cooldown is reduced by 2 seconds, but its maximum charge is reduced by 1. Seems like a pretty fair trade-off, honestly. Aspect of Overheating. After channeling Incinerate for 2 seconds, it deals critical fire damage for 5 seconds. Casting Incinerate refreshes that bonus, so you can maintain that bonus as it goes. Aspect of Charged Flash. After Charge Bolt hits enemy 50 times, which Charge Bolt goes off very quickly, your next 3 casts of Charge Bolt becomes waves that pierce and deal damage. So critical shock damage. Aspect of Elemental Constellation. Casting Pyromancy, Shock, and Frost skills conjure a matching elemental dagger around you that pierces through enemies, dealing damage after 3 seconds. So it feels kind of like it's going to be like a Twisting Blades thing, where it just like kind of circles and then it does damage. The damage is increased by 100% per matching element that you cast. Okay, so then the new passives that we're getting for sorceresses. One of the new passives we're going to be getting is Enlightenment. Casting any skill grants 1 stack of Enlightenment, or grants 3 if your previous cast skill is a different element. After gaining 100 stacks, you become enlightened and lose 5 stacks per second. While you're enlightened, what you do is you get 25% increased damage, 45% mana regeneration, and 20% increased attack speed. So this is one of your new key passives. So this is going to be one of the ones that at the very bottom of the skill tree at the very end. Fundamental Release. Each fire, lightning, and cold attack you make against an enemy increases the damage it takes from your attacks by 10% per element up to 30%. Energy Focus. You generate 6-second barrier for 0.5 seconds of your maximum life every second up to 30. This effect is lost after 5 seconds, losing health. Dampen Lair. You gain 2% damage reduction while you have an active barrier. Elemental Synergies. Your Frost, Shock, and Pyromancy damage is increased by 1% for each skill you have equipped of that type. Evocation gains 4% cooldown reduction. It's just straight cooldown reduction. That's pretty cool. If you found this video helpful, make sure to share it with people. I'm live on YouTube and Twitch every night. Stop by, say hi, let me know what you think in the comments of all of the changes that we got. Catch you on the flip side.